non-tax component of the revenue, which stands at 25.61% less than projected. The GLF expenditure during the review period stands at 9.8 billion, which is a 22.45 below the media budget of 12.7. The cash allocation mechanism that we use dictates that expenditures are met from revenue generated as far as possible in order to reduce the need for borrowing, to reduce the amount needed for borrowing. This is mainly attributable to the GLF capital and order lower than budget as a result of that. Capital expenditure is expected to improve in the second half of the year as we begin to implement the second phase of the Baton-Harding Highway and the health and infrastructure projects, and we aim to improve the expenditure on the budget execution in the second half when the budget support revenues are expected to be realized. The second table gives the rundown of the revenue performance by the categories as indicated in the summary. Total revenue of 8.6 budget against 8.3, and the subsequent components are as follows. Tax revenue 6.9 against 6.8, which is an outperformance. Tax on wealth 2.4 was projected, we realized 2.1, and the various subsequent components thereof are personal tax 859 against 815, corporate and other income tax and other taxes, corporation tax 1.4 was budgeted, 1.2 was realized. On the indirect tax, we have that's the indirect tax 4.3 was budgeted, we realized 4.7, and domestic tax on goods and services 1.7 was budgeted, however we realized 1.3. Tax on international trade 2.6 was budgeted, but 3.4 was realized, leading to an outperformance of 776 million. And the duty component were 1.5 budget against an actual of 1.7. VAT on imports 1.1 billion against actual of 1.6, which is an actual outperformance of 586. In a summary, these are the highlights of the revenue performance. Honorable Speaker and members of the esteemed National Assembly, the consolidated revenue aspect, both tables analyze the sources of income and their performance against the media budget. It is important to highlight that while we have achieved significant milestones in some types of taxes, such as tax on international trade and VAT and imports, there are certain sources of revenue that fell short of budget for the first half, including non-tax revenue and taxes on income and wealth. The first half year revenue performance overall is below budget due to the delay in the budget support from development partners. The activities on the prior actions, which are preconditions for the approval and disbursement of the budget support, flowed into the second half of the year. And as such, disbursement could not be made for the projected revenue in the first half of the year. Tax on income and wealth is below the expectation, with a total of 2.9 billion compared to a mid-year target of 2.44. The payroll tax performed better than expected at 48 million against 3.7 million in excess, which is 3.74 million in excess. Top revenue performance, tax on international trade. This revenue line has exceeded media forecast at 39%. The success can be credited to the duty and the VAT on imports that have outperformed during the period. Duty collected amount to 1.72 billion, which is 190 million more than the budget of 1.53 media target. VAT on imports of performance can be attributed to VAT on oil products, which have performed significantly over its 271 million estimate by 170%. Overall, Indirect tax has been driving revenue performance, surpassing its target revenue of 4.39 billion. The success is attributed to the good performance on tax on international trade. We have seen for the first half tax revenues from international trade outperforming tax revenues on domestic operations. So, on the expenditure side, we've provided the highlights of the table, which total expenditure was projected to be 12.7 billion. Actual expenditure turned out to be 9.8, which is saving of 2.8 billion. And the personnel emoluments was budgeted at 2.8, actual turned out to be 3.3. Other charges, estimated budget for this first half, 5.8 billion against 4 billion. And goods and services were budgeted at 1.4 billion against an actual of 1.6 billion. Subsidies and transfers were budgeted at 4.4 billion against 2.4. And interest was budgeted at 1.5 billion against an actual of 1.3 billion. Capital expenditures were budgeted at 2.4 billion against an actual of 1.1 billion. Honorable Speaker and members of the esteemed National Assembly, overall expenditure is within the budget for the first half of the year, standing relatively below the end June estimates. Total actual expenditure amount to 9.8 billion, while the targeted budget expenditure was 12.7 billion, which translates to a 22.45% less than budget. We have also identified the top performers.
Honorable Minister,
yes.
Can you raise your voice? I think the active people are.
We have also identified the top performers, efficient expenditure management and cost savings measures. Expenditures on personnel emoluments and goods and services exceed their target by 513 million and 212 million respectively, representing a 17.8 and 15.3% above their respective targets. GLF, capital and subsidy transfers were below their budget targets by 50% and 45.36% respectively. However, it should be noted that the capital expenditure and subsidies respectively consume 45% and 49% of their annual budget target for the first half. Honorable Speaker and members, esteemed members of the National Assembly, in conclusion, the budget implementation during the first half of the year remains prudent. The overall revenue budget fell short of, the overall actual revenue fell short of the budget by 1.83 billion, but this was offset by a lower actual expenditure than budget by 2.85, leading to a lower financing requirement than the budget of more than 2 billion. The cash allocation mechanism is an important tool that assists in the budget implementation process as expenditures were constrained by the revenue generated. Efforts were exerted to realize prior actions for the budget support, which is an important element of the revenue, and already significant milestones are realized in the second half of the year. Fiscal measures will be instituted to support a prudent budget implementation whilst making the much needed expenditure to support growth. With this, I conclude my brief. Honorable Speaker and members of the National Assembly, I submit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister for Finance and Economic Affairs, for your brilliant summation. Honorable members, pursuant to Order 48.6 of the Standing Orders, and I quote, after the statement has been delivered in the Assembly, a period of questions on the statement, which shall last no more than 1 hour, may then ensue The Speaker shall determine the period taking into consideration the content of the statement, the number of members wishing to ask questions, and the pressure of other businesses of the House. With these honorable members, I now invite honorable members to ask questions relating to the minister's statement. I have a list with me. I now begin with the honorable member for Woolly East.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Minister, the report is saying the revenue underperformed by 17.91. And when you go down, you'll see which stands at 25.61. I'm just cutting it short. Less than the projection. And our experience is that in the early phase of the year, 2 months, 3 months, many receipts are not ready. You pay receipts are not ready. For example, vehicle licenses. What measures is your ministry thinking of implementing to ensure that this underperformance of the revenue is being minimized? Thank you.
You can go ahead, Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, and thank you, Honorable Member for Woolly. Yes, the underperformance of the revenue performance in the first half was mainly attributed to the budget support, if you look at the numbers. The budget support was estimated at 1.4 billion, and no budget support was realized in the first half of the year. And as we explained in the brief statement, budget support is contingent on prior actions being taken. And those prior actions are sectorally based, broad-based, and some of the prior actions could not be concluded in the first half. But I can report to the August Assembly that some of those prior actions were realized, and as we speak, we received 2 million euros from AFD, Agence Française de Développement, and we have concluded the prior action for the African Development Bank, which is expected to bring in $7 million. Also, prior actions for the World Bank amounting to 4.5 million have also been realized, and those revenues will fall in. As we speak, as of last week, a World Bank mission was in country to follow up on the prior actions, and we are at the advanced stage of finalizing that. For the EU budget support, the prior action was a costed NDP, and the NDP costing is already ongoing, so we hope we'll conclude those. And those are the major drivers of the underperformance in the first half. Yes, in terms of the non-availability of receipts, that has been noted. That's why we've seen the underperformance of the domestic taxes. We are working on the digitalization, and we hope that will address that gap. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. I now invite the Honorable Member for Latrikunda Sabiji.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. My first question, I don't know, each member should ask how many questions, because I have 5 questions. What? 1 question each? Okay, thank you very much. Honorable Minister, thank you very much for your presentation, and I commend you for imposing the travel ban. I'm still appealing if you can impose it further to the lifespan of the government till 2026, December. My question is, you mentioned in your second to last speech, overall budget expenditure is within the budget for the first half of the year, standing relatively below their end June estimates. Total actual expenditure amounts to 9.8 billion, while the targeted budget expenditure was 12.7 billion. This translates to 22.45% less than the budget. Now, my question is, are you being frugal or there is no money? Because there are ministries that doesn't have their cash allocations for the past 2 months. So if your expenditure is less than the actual disbursement, I want you to explain to the National Assembly what is happening. Are you being frugal with your expenditure or there is no money? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member for Latrikunda. When it comes to, as I have mentioned, even though a budget is a plan and we have a cash allocation mechanism, we can only allocate so much cash as revenue generated. If we want to go by budget, by only allocating budgets, we'll be busting and there will be a lot of debts. So it's prudence that's dictating our allocation mechanism. It is not our wish to constrain the sectors, but fiscal prudence requires so, and that's what we are doing. Thank you.
Honorable Member for Brikama South.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Okay. Speaker, your mic. Sorry. Okay. Honorable Minister, thank you so much for this update. I want to inquire whether actually, as you rightly alluded to, by the budget performance, which was shortfall by 17.9, and this is expected in the second quarter, second half of the year, do you have an alternative plan if this does not materialize with regards to the support that is coming in? The other aspect, you talk about the non-tax component of the revenue that is not forthcoming. And I know all the budgeting was done as per the total budget approved. As far as this is not materialized, we will continue to be constraining the ministry with regard to allocation. So do you have an extra plan to take care of both the support and the non-tax revenue generating component of it? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker and Member for Brikama South. Yes, we have the non-tax revenue shortfall having been a big constraint on expenditure. We are also working on many fronts to emphasize domestic resource mobilization. As we speak, measures are going on to really roll out the payment of rental income tax. As we know, the rental income tax is a tax that should be paid, but we realize that implementation of that has been lagging. So we're working with GRA, and for the information of the August Assembly, GRA has now dedicated a full unit to follow up on the rental income tax. As we speak, they are now doing the registration of the properties that are entitled to pay rental income tax, and measures are taken to make sure that kicks into effect. On the budget support, I have already mentioned the actions taken, and it is our plan that once these come into play, the rest of the second half of the year will witness increased expenditure execution. But as I have mentioned, the overhanging debt constraint will be a big limiting factor. We cannot spend as expected in the budget when the requisite revenue is not in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now invite the Honorable Minority Leader and the Member for Brikama North.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. I believe part of my question has been answered when the Honorable Minister was responding to question from the member for Woolly East and that of Brikama South. However, if I may add just a portion, the 2023 budget, which was 12.7 billion, was allocated to the non-tax revenue generating component of the revenue. However, the non-tax revenue generating component of the revenue was 22.45% less than the budget. So it's prudence that dictating our allocation mechanism. regarding the underperformance of the budget and then the constraint in the budget support, even whereas optimistic is high in the second half. Whether that will realize or not is something. In the event for contingency, does the ministry has any plan to review the budget or bring in supplementary budget as contingency measure in order to avert failure if so happens that the budget support may not be forthcoming?
Thank you, Honorable Speaker and Honorable Member for Brikama North and Minority Leader. As we speak, we have completed the first half, and our budget execution rate is at a level that we do not believe we may have cause to come to revise the budget. We are optimistic that the budget support will be forthcoming, but in the event, as any planning entails, that does not fall in, measures are in place to ensure that the expenditures are constrained to support the execution of the revenue generated. The revenue generated will support, because these are the major issues. When you are implementing a budget, you look at the headline and you look at fiscal measures you can put in place so that non-essential elements will be constrained without deterring the execution of the major elements of the budget implementation. And it was in this direction that we believe the measures taken on travels, and it's not only travels, there are other efficiency measures that we are working on, and those are at advanced stages to ensure we rationalize expenditures as to the furthest extent possible in line with the revenue generation. But I think it's not just about revenue, expenses. The issue is to enhance the revenue performance, and the focus should be on domestic resource mobilization. The tax compliance rate in the country is very low, and every effort is made to deter that or to not encourage full compliance with the tax laws. That is why we have established a Directorate of Taxes and Revenue specifically in the ministry to enhance and support the GRA in the compliance drive. We've seen significant gains in this direction. One of them is the overall review of the tax expenditure on duties, which is constrained, as well as measures to ensure that tax compliance, particularly by corporation taxpayers, are adhered to. So we believe the opportunity lies in domestic resource mobilization and growing the top line, which is the revenue. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite the Honorable Member for Opanyumi.
Part of my question has been answered by the Honorable Minister, so I decline. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now invite the Honorable Member for Upper Salu.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, and thank you, Honorable Minister, for being really making difficult decisions in the fiscal prudence, which is necessary. Now, going by the figures you actually have shown, it's very clear you are trying to spend what you have. And the differences in the budget, in the revenue budget, was as a result of your inability to get a budget support, which actually has some other components that we have to meet. This is actually pointing that we need to do more domestic revenue mobilization so that we cannot depend on this budget support. So what short-term strategies as well as long-term strategies do you actually have to ensure we improve domestic revenue mobilization? Even though you've already mentioned one, which is the, creating that kind of office. So what do we really have now in the short term and also thinking in the long term to improve our domestic revenue mobilization? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker and Honorable Member for Salum. I think this is the key to the overall economic development of the country. We have embarked on a number of areas in the short to medium term. One, we've already identified, this is the creation of the budget tax and revenue directorate. But the other element, which is the elephant in the room, is the state-owned enterprises. The state-owned enterprises' total assets comprise about 34 billion. These have not been paying any dividend to government, except last year when we received 95 million from ports and 8 million from GNPC. The efforts we have put in place was largely a success through the support of this August Assembly last year when you ratified the state-owned enterprise bill. That bill is now in motion, and the commissioners have been identified. Likely this week, they will be put to work. And the overall efficiency of the state-owned enterprise is central to the national development, because these are investments, these are enterprises that should be performing, that should give revenue to the government. Because the model for the state-owned enterprise is they operate on market principles, they are paid market rate, their terms and conditions are away from the civil service with the aim of delivering market performance. But this has not been the case. That is why a performance contract has been signed with a number of them. I think as we speak, 6 performance contracts have been signed, and we are on course to sign additional performance contract before the end of the year to enhance their financial performance. We believe if these state-owned enterprises perform, their contributor to the central pot should increase, and that will help in our domestic resource mobilization. That's one front. The other front is the tax compliance rate. The tax compliance rate in the country is very low. As only taxes that are compulsory. That's why you could see it is only those taxes that cannot be avoided that have performed the most. That's international trade. Because in international trade, you must pay the taxes. And the digitalization efforts we've introduced there are yielding fruits. The Escuda wall is being rolled out across all the borders. And as you know, the GRA is working very hard on those. But now the next step is domestic taxes. If you look at, we discovered, even for some enterprises, they deduct withholding tax and have not been remitting to the GRA. Some have been collecting VAT and their compliance rate is low. The rental income I have talked about. So revenue is the key driver of the economy, and we are working hard to make sure that we work closely with the GRA and maximize the domestic revenue mobilization. These are some of the medium to short-term strategies we put in place. But overall, I think in the next year, the fiscal measures to entrench these reforms will be in the expected next year's budget. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite the Honorable Member for Central Badibu.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Minister, this information is really threatening, and it shows that the economy is really seeking. Honorable Minister, pertaining to personal emoluments and goods and services, can you buttress on it? What measures do you have to ensure that these areas are really addressed and the goods and services can boost something to the economy?
Honorable Speaker, thank you very much, and Honorable Member of Central Badibu. I appreciate your feedback, but I hereby explain that no, the situation is not as dire as you are putting it. In fact, our revenue performance in the first half of this year is better than that of last year. In the first half of last year, revenue realized was 7.9 against 8.4 currently. It's true that the expenditure base has increased. Measures are taken to introduce fiscal discipline, but that's what it takes to manage an economy. And the challenges we are going through is not unique to Gambia. If you look at the sub-region, you look at the world, everywhere, these are challenges and pressures every country, every government is going through. We're pleased to inform the National Assembly that as challenging as they are, cost pressures are there, but the requisite measures are always applied to match the challenges on the revenue side. That's why you see the move by the executive to curtail travels, which we believe are not mission critical. And it is not all rosy, but these are what the times call for. And what we are doing is not unique to Gambia. Thank you.
I now invite the Honorable Member for Kombo South.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Minister, thank you for fulfilling the requirement. I want to make an appeal. Please, next time when you are presenting the report, the tables are very important. You need to improve the font size, and I think your ministry should be generous enough to provide clean copies for all the members instead of bringing in photocopies, because some of the photocopying are not clear, and these are important documents that we need to make reference to. Honorable Speaker, the Minister, you have talked about a lot about non-compliance of tax collection, especially the domestic tax. What strategies are you putting in place to make sure that you go after the big non-tax compliance companies in the country? Because this is something that is impinging on our performance.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, Honorable Member for Kombo South. Point noted, for future, we will provide a page for each table. We apologize because sometimes you look at things from your perspective that some members will struggle to read the tables, but that's noted. Yes, on the big taxpayers, efforts are afoot. We have actually done a lot of work in this area, and we have identified a number of light taxpayers, also eligible taxpayers, and are currently putting in measures to ensure that compliance rate. One such measures we are working on is to ensure that anybody or any institution applying for a duty waiver going forward, your tax compliance status will be the first question to ask. That any enterprise that is requesting any service from the government, tax compliance will be a key parameter to ensure that that is fulfilled. The second element is to look at the taxpayer database. That's why we have engaged and obtained support from the World Bank to introduce a digital tax-based platform. Procurement of this software solution is afoot, and as soon as this tax system is rolled out, we will believe that the compliance rate will go up. And you are spot on. Some of the large taxpayers have been found wanting, measures have been taken, and discussions are afoot to make sure that they come on board. But we have noted and taken the appropriate actions already. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now invite the Honorable Majority Leader and Member of Control.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. And thank you very much, Honorable Minister. I think with my little knowledge in mathematics, the briefing or the presentation or statement really expose or try to explain as a country we are in the right direction. And of course, if you go to your overall expenditure, it speaks in tandem with the policy of the travel ban. Haven't seen an upsurge in the personnel emoluments expenditure, which really exceeds target. It's a good decision. I won't say that. My question is that the overall tax, indirect tax, has been driven by the surpassing.
Point of observation is not a debate.
Not debating.
We are on question. Please.
I'm not debating. On the international trade, you've given us that it has really performed, and that performance has really yielded to 4.3 billion. What do you have or measures in place for us to really exploit this area so that we can really have much more trade in our country as a nation, so that our revenue base could be advanced? This is really welcoming, seeing an increase in international trade and getting us much resources we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker and Honorable Member for Kantora and Majority Leader. Yes, we took notice, but this performance is on the backdrop of reforms in this area. If you look at international trade, these are the first areas of reforms that we've instituted. Last year's launching of the Ascuda wall has really digitalized operations for international tax revenue collection. And we are not resting on our rollers. We are rolling this out to the borders, and the GRA is putting in measures to ensure that the digitalization of all border tax operations is in place, and additional measures are also taken in place. We are working hard to leverage on the gains and the experience learned, and we are sure we want to export this experience in our domestic taxes. This is why we are working on digitalizing the domestic tax collection. GRA is now at the very initial phase of having a database of rental income, also compliance with the pay-as-you-earn deductions, VAT are all afoot, and the most logical approach is to digitalize these operations. These are the efforts we are putting in place, and we hope when they perform, the priority for the government is to ensure that domestic resources mobilization is at the anchor of our economic strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite the Honorable Member for Kiang West.
Honorable Speaker, thank you very much. Honorable Minister, could remember in the budget 2022, we have a budget amount of 31 billion, and to 2023, we have an estimate of 35 billion. And the question was this really realistic? We revised the budget in 2022 looking at 31 billion, and we are increasing significantly to 35 billion. Is this really realistic? The answer was yes, it's on record. And part of the reasons that you have given, the reason why the budget in 2022 was revised was that the international commitment was not forthcoming, and here it has appeared again. And in your conclusion, also part of the reason that we had revised the budget in 2022, in conclusion you said the cash allocation mechanism is an important tool that assisted in the budget implementation process, and expenditures were constrained by the revenue generated. And this was also one of the reasons the budget was revised in 2022. Are you telling us that there are possibilities to revise a budget again in 2023 after defending that that budget was realistic? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. First, a bit of background. The 2022 budget revision was premised on the non-realization of budget support, simply because those budget supports were items that were not already agreed with the development partners at the time. One budget support was ADB, and as for 2022, ADB had no budget program for support for the country. That was the explanation to suffice that. The 35 billion you're quoting is for all funds. The brief that we are presenting is on GLF funds alone. And the third element is, yes, we revised the budget 2022 to redirect all the charges to the personnel emolument to support the salary review. Those were the previous on that. Yes, we said it was realistic, and we are still confident that what we did for 2023 is realistic, because we have crossed the milestones on the budget support. As I have briefed the esteemed General Assembly, August Assembly, that already we received 2 billion from AFD, Agence Française de Développement. We have realized we have received $500,000 from the World Bank. Another 4 million budget support prior actions have been met. The prior actions for the ADB has been met. And
Honorable Minister, $4 million?
No, dollars. The amount I'm quoting for budget support are in dollars. Agence Française de Développement has given 2 million euros as budget support, which came in July. July is outside the reporting period. That's why it's not covered. A 500,000 budget support from the performance-linked disbursement for this public financial management program has been received. 4 million prior actions have been also completed, We are on course to receive that. The budget support triggers or the prior action for the ADB for $7 million have also been completed. The two outstanding budget support items are from the EU, which is 13 million euros, and the budget support trigger there is a costed NDP, and the costing process is at advanced stage. And for the World Bank, we have met, out of the 8, we have met already more than 4 of them, and we are on course to complete them before the end of the year. So budget is a plan. It's just like any pilot. You file your flight plans, but actual may be deviating. That's why we are here to brief the August Assembly about the execution of the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite the Honorable Nominated Member, Kewa Lamfofana.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. And I equally want to thank the Honorable Minister for Finance and Economic Affairs for the presentation of the mid-year budget execution for 2023 in fulfilling your constitutional mandate. Honorable Speaker, from the presentation, it is evident that expenditures can be controlled, because you can realize that you've been able to curtail the expenses by over $2.8 billion. But on the other hand, if you look at the consolidated revenue aspect, you realize that there was a shortfall of what? 1.8 billion. So my initial question has already been answered, because I was going to ask the shortfall, because you've been able to reduce the deficit again by 1.3 billion, which definitely is commendable. You know, I was going to ask whether you had any challenges in it. Does it affect their performance or efficiency? But basically the answers you provided is the allocations are based on what is received. So my question would be, in future presentations, do we have plans to transcend beyond providing the physical figures to the level that will really present them in accordance with set targets, so that A, it will help the National Assembly in our budget preparations? Because if you look at the actual budget performance, we are saying over 8.6 billion have been expended. So the set targets, what have we realized? What are the variances, not only in figures, but with regards to what? The outcomes. This will also help us in our functions. Like very soon we will have the budget session. So provided in the mid-year review, when the report is coming, the targets and the variances will not be only limited in their monetary equivalence, but it will also include their physical equivalence as well. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, and thank you, Honorable Nominated Member. A very notable observation. However, this will be possible if we are following a nationally program-based budget or activities-based budgeting, where the numbers are linked to the activities. As we speak right now, that is a work in progress. We are not yet there, and the best authority to deliver on the implementation of the activities are the sectors themselves. The Minister of Finance can only collate figures relating to the execution, but in terms of the activities, that is best left to the sectors, and we'll be more than happy to collate the sector's contribution as to the implementation of their activities for future, if possible. Thank you.
Honorable Member for Oluyundum constituency. For Busumbala.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for adopting measures for physical discipline. Honorable Minister, in your brief, you did tell us the first half of the revenue performance overall is below the budget due to delay in receipt of budget support from development partners. And when ahead to made mention of preconditions that need to be satisfied and that lead to this delay. What are these preconditions and whether they will not persist themselves in fulfillment of the second half of the year? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker and Honorable Member for Busumbala. Yes, this is a very good question because every budget support is linked to prior actions. And these prior actions are a set of reforms that the development partners will agree with the government. And these reforms are geared towards building our institutional capability. As such, they are multi-sectoral. Each donor has a set of prior conditions. Like, for example, the budget support trigger for the EU was a fully costed NDP. And as we know, the NDP was approved, but the costing was not done. So the EU is saying, if you want us to receive our budget support, you should quantify your budget NDP, which is an important set of reform that we need to embark on, because if you have a national development plan, you need to know the quantum of funds required to deploy that plan. So those are the reforms entrenched in each budget support. For example, in the budget support trigger prior actions for the World Bank, one of them is the rolling out of the regulations for the new procurement bill, which was passed last year. But of course, you have a lot of actions that these prior actions would require. We have at the GPPA level completed the development of the regulations. But as you know, you need to go to validation 1, validation 2. For each validation means bringing on wider stakeholders, having a retreat. So some of these actions do take time. And as such, these activities overflow to the second year. These are the prior actions. For each development partner, the prior actions are agreed with the government to address a set of reform agenda that will support the institutional strengthening of the government. But of course, it's not within, these prior actions are not within the Ministry of Finance alone, but are across the government mechanism. And like I explained, if you want to roll out the approved regulation for the GPPA bill, act, we cannot sit at the GPPA, conclude the regulation and pass it. The process would be that you finalize the regulation, you call for a first validation, you call for a second validation, you incorporate the feedback in a participatory process. So this was it. But we are sure we will meet most of them, and we are hopeful to realize them. Thank you.
Thank you. I invite Honorable Member for Bakau.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Minister, in your own words, you've indicated that the payroll tax performed better than expected at GMD 48.33 million, which is GMD 3.74 million in excess. Can we share your thoughts? How is this possible?
Thank you. This is supported by activities of the Immigration Department because the payroll tax is mainly related to expatriates. As we have seen, the Immigration Department collected more revenue in the first half of this year than the entire last year. So when you have efficiencies at a sector that is in charge of this, these are the type of outcome you expect. Thank you.
Now I invite the Honorable Member for Fonyi Kansala.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I thank the Honorable Minister of Finance. As per Honorable Minister, in your cash allocation strategy or measure, we realize with interaction, some of the institutions do complain of a lower percentage of their cash allocation. And you have a plan in your cash allocation. Can you help us, mechanisms to be put in place to avoid some of those crimes of those institutions? What, as a ministry, in that cash allocation process, because